Hey guys, my name is Ashley Welbern and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am going to be presenting on Bessel Kolk. And Bessel is not a Christian theorist, but he is somebody that I've studied pretty in depth who does a lot of work in dealing with trauma. So I went through one of his seminars. It was a 2-day, 8-hour-long day seminars on how the body keeps the score. So the main book that I'm really going to be referring to over the course of this presentation is that book, The Body Keeps the Score, and then as well as using some from his psychological trauma. So in order to do this, I have enlisted the help of my kids. So I am going to be teaching them since they're home on quarantine. This is going to be part of their schoolwork today. And I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, so they're going to be my students. So I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit about Bessel with them. And then we're going to practice a little bit of what he does. And then I'm going to conclude my presentation with my best friend who is in biblical counseling as well. And she's going to critique it and just kind of talk through maybe some questions that would come up in your mind that should come up in our minds as biblical counselors when we're presented with theorists who maybe have some truth, but is not necessarily rooted in scripture. And then we're going to discuss just a little bit of that. So I will do my best to get this all done in 15 minutes. Bessel Kolk was born in the Netherlands in 1943, during the time when the Germans actually occupied the Netherlands. He grew up in a Dutch family and was surrounded by Holocaust survivors. He had a lot of early trauma in his childhood and was actually abused by his father. His mother was said to actually be pretty cold and unhappy, so his childhood led him to really begin to develop an interest in trauma. He went on to graduate from the University of Chicago and studied psychiatry at Harvard. He began his early career in the 1970s working with Vietnam War veterans. So his research in the area of trauma really began with these veterans. So as you can see, we're in 2020, so he spent the last 5 decades studying trauma. And one of the things that's really interesting that he's noted is what actually happens in our body when we experience trauma. So for him, his epistemology really focuses on empirical research and data. And so over the course of these decades, he's studied numerous individuals who have been the focus of typically post-traumatic stress disorder. Oftentimes he's used subjects that have dealt with things like childhood abuse, different things like that. And so he's gone on to show that there's different effects in the brain when you experience trauma. So I'm going to use my kids for an example now. So whenever we experience any sort of trauma, and the first thing that came to my mind was when we were actually the 3 of us in a car accident a few years ago. So my first question to y'all was, what do you remember happening in your body when we had that car accident? Just what did you feel?
Shaky.
Okay. Sayla?
Like chills.
Chills. Anything
My
else?
neck hurt. It was tense.
Yeah. So you'll notice really quickly anytime you experience trauma, and trauma can typically for him it is a big T trauma, so it's not just small traumas that we experience, but anytime we have difficult traumatic experiences in life, what he uses is his tagline is that the body keeps the score. So those things that happen in our body that are traumatic life experiences actually stick with us over the course of time. And if we don't work through those trauma, our body stores them. So he goes in and actually shows, I'm going to show you a brain scan that was happening in an individual. This couple was actually in a car accident back in Canada and a big pileup, and so they experienced a very traumatic wreck. Saw many people killed around them, but they actually survived unscathed. Now, if you'll look at these 2 different images, one of these shows the activity in the right hemisphere of the brain that was transpiring during that car accident, and then as he talked about it later, it also showed flashbacks. This other one over here, girls, you can probably see from where you're sitting. Over there, can you see all this black mass on that one? Yeah. And then you move over to this one, and what do you see?
Like none.
Pretty much nothing. So that's just kind of a blanked out. So have you ever had a really difficult experience in life, and all of a sudden you can say, I really don't feel anything? Maybe you are like this person who just kind of blanks out. Or maybe you have so many different emotions going on inside of your head that you really don't know what's happening. So his view of man is that we're really physical beings, and that what happens in our emotions also happen in our bodies. So he's kind of a dichotomous, viewing the body and the mind. And so I was just going to go through really quick the difference between the left and the right brain for him. So if you'll look right here, what do you notice on the right brain? What happens in our right brain?
It's happy.
It's happy. That's where we experience emotions. That's where we touch, where we feel. That's really kind of our seat of senses. Then you move over here to your left brain, and what do you see? This is where you verbalize things, where you can do, I've got one daughter who loves to do math, so that's where your brain is really working through numbers and data and analysis. So what happens when we experience trauma, typically this side of the brain goes offline. And so he'll show over here where some parts of those brain literally almost look like they're dead or dormant. And so this is where we would find people saying, my emotions are so out of control, I feel like I've lost my mind. They've actually lost that ability to process through the vocabulary of what they've experienced. Or maybe you have people who are so analytical, they really don't feel. So they're the one over here that has very little activity going on in their brain. And so they're just kind of stuck in this place of they can talk, but they can't verbalize their feelings. So our goal is to learn to find a good combination of the two. So really, when he moves into his methodology, his goal is to find a way to get both sides of the brain online. Now, there's a few different methods that he uses to do this. One is called EMDR. And EMDR is a process basically where we put on these little like headset type things that enable our brain to begin to move out of the emotional side of thinking and to reprocess. Then another one is called neurofeedback. You guys might think this is kind of cool. You hook up electrodes to your head, and then you actually play a video game with your head. So you're never using a joystick or anything like that. You're learning to control your thoughts in a way that you're moving something across the screen. Now, that's not very easy to do, because to get EMDR or to do neurofeedback, you've got to find either somebody who's trained in those, or you've got to sign up for some sort of test course. But another thing that he really highly recommends is yoga. So this is something that we've done as a family. We like to do yoga sometimes at night. But what the goal is of yoga is that we're actually engaging our body and our mind. So when you do yoga, you're pulling back in your senses and your thinking. And he's shown, all of his research and data shows that actually over the course of time, he's had much higher success, and research points to yoga being far more effective than even medication. So we like to not use medication when possible, and yoga is something you can do. You can pull it up on YouTube and you can do yoga from home. But it's a great way to engage your brain in dealing with different emotions and things that you're feeling. So one of the things I deal with often with my kids when we're doing things is I notice they're daydreaming. Even right now, their brains are already going somewhere else. So one of the things that he wants to practice is mindfulness. So bringing us back to the present. So I want you guys to try this for just a second. So girls, I want you to take your fingertips and I want you just to tap on your temples with your fingertips. So that right there is rooting you into the present. Now I want you to tap on just underneath your eyes, kind of in your sinus cavity area. Good. Now tap on the tip of your nose. Tap on your upper lip. Tap right here on your chest, kind of in your sternum. Tap right down here, maybe look a little bit like a monkey tapping on your stomach. So what that does is that brings us back into the present moment and connects us with our body. Yoga very similarly teaches us a few things in how to engage our mind and our body. So the last practice I want to encourage us to try, that we can all try from home, so you guys who are watching this, is called square breathing. So square breathing basically brings us down back to the moment. So if you've ever had a client, or if you yourself have dealt with any kind of anxiety, or when you feel like your heart is racing, one of the best things that you can do is bring your breathing back down, and you'll notice immediately that your heart rate begins to lower. So I want you guys to try this. So I want you to take a deep breath in, and then hold your breath right there for 4 seconds, and then very slowly blow it back out through your mouth. Now count to 4 very slowly. Good. Then deep breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 2, 3, 4. Blow it out slowly. 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. Now deep breath in through your nose. 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 2, 3, 4. Blow it back out slowly. 2, 3, 4. We're going to do that one more time. So deep breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 2, 3, 4. And then very slowly blow it back out. 2, 3, 4. So these are just some simple ways that you can practice mindfulness and engagement in the present moment. So that is one of the goals that Bessel really works through. So that's one of his easiest methodologies, an easy way to kind of translate what he does. So now we're going to kind of talk through, how do we critique something like this from a biblical perspective? Okay, so now for part 3, we are going to focus on looking at Bessel van der Kolk from a biblical perspective and what would it look like to kind of come at this from that angle. So to help me do that, I have my best friend Megan, who is also in training to become a biblical counselor. So she's going to ask a few questions that I thought might be some things that would also be on your all's mind, and hopefully we can kind of talk through that in the next few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Ash, for having me. This is fun. I really enjoyed your videos, and it helped me kind of think of a couple of questions when I watched your videos. So my first question is, when you mentioned that the brain tends to either maybe shut down or even become overactive when it experiences some form of trauma, why do you think that happens?
I think it kind of points to the fact that we are both a product of our nature and our nurture. And according to God's word, we know that by nature, we're fallen human beings. We are broken and sinful. And so I think our knee jerk reaction is not going to be to respond in healthiness very often. I think our flesh is typically going to lead us down that path of typically sinful responses. Then there's also been things that were modeled us in childhood from our parents who are also broken. And so I think the reality is here, we've got a couple of different things at play. The beauty that I would say leading into this is the beauty of the gospel to bring redemption and new creation in the midst of both our nature and our nurture, to provide a different approach to dealing with trauma when we're aware of what's happening.
That reminds me a lot of fight, flight, or freeze, and how very often, for whatever reasons, habits or learned behavior, how we tend to do one of those. But and sometimes we're asked to try to figure out within counseling which tends to be what we go to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that can't be unlearned, or a different reaction, especially in the biblical light, could be learned. So great. So another question that I have is, in the secular world, the word, especially like mindfulness, is really a hot button word a lot of times used these days. How would you connect mind and body theories that are connected with mindfulness with the biblical view of the heart?
I think that's a great question. So really in mindfulness, very often it's looked at an emptying of yourselves. And so I would kind of bring in maybe a counterpoint to that of saying, when we're being mindful, let's invite the Lord into our presence. So mindfulness would be more of that open-handed posture before the Lord. If I invite you to come in, and immediately I picture Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. So when we're practicing mindfulness, it's not an emptying out of all of your worries and self as much as an inviting in of Christ to that moment, to the pain, to the trauma, and connecting with him in that stillness.
That's awesome. Absolutely. I would totally agree with you, because the heart, part of the mind, is part of the heart. So, and the Bible's constantly talking about the heart and constantly talking about the mind, and that we're not stuck, and that can change through our sanctification process. So the last question that I had for you today is, do you think that the church maybe unintentionally shies away from dealing with people who are experiencing trauma or have experienced trauma? And if so, or if not, why?
I would say hands down, yes. I feel like most of the people that I have seen feel somewhat competent to help people who are in maybe some crises in their marriage, family conflict, making decisions, dealing with difficult life issues. But often when things like abuse or other traumatic experiences surface, we tend to refer them out to the professionals. So I think it's very important that we can draw a few principles that Bessel did highlight in here. And one of the things that he noted was that in order for true healing to take place, there needed to be a place of presence and comfort in an individual. So even if just as a pastor, as a counselor, we're able to be with people and be present with them. Think about Jesus. What did he do to people who were suffering? He showed up and met them where they were at, and he was near and he was present. What promise do we have from his word? That even in the midst of sorrow, in our deepest, darkest place, he is right there beside us. He's near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So I think as biblical counselors that we have the opportunity to provide to those who come to us for counsel a hope of a lasting presence. And I would hope and pray that we would also model someone who's not judgmental, someone who is not quick to give answers, but someone who's quicker to be still and to listen. So a lot of Bessel's research really does point out the fact that when there is that loving presence and there is that connectivity, that really ushers in healing. It doesn't say anything about their qualification to necessarily deal with all these really difficult things, but if we can be present with them and we can help them know that they're not alone in the pain and the trauma that they've suffered, and show them that they have Jesus who is by their side at all times, and then we can model being there with them, I think we have a much richer, deeper hope where we can draw from trauma research and then apply it in a biblical context that gives genuine, lasting hope. But I think it's very important that we don't shy away from some of the empirical research and data that comes out actually showing what's happening in the brain. I have come across another theorist who is a Christian neuroscientist. Maybe some of you guys have heard of her, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and she wrote a book, Switch Your Brain On, or Switch On Your Brain. And I think there's a part of that that to me co-aligns very well with Paul's teaching, taking down every stronghold and taking every thought to make it obey Christ. So there's both this need to have an outside source and have the gospel even poured into us and to be loved on by other people. And then also that responsibility of what am I choosing to set my mind on and my affections on that would then change my actions.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think sometimes we as the church are afraid to help, because we're afraid we'll help in a wrong way. The Bible tells us to give truth and love, and maybe we're a little nervous about what truth we're supposed to give them. But I think when our heart is focused on love, like you said, we're creating comfort for someone who's been through something. But then we do have some responsibility to hone in on our skills, on our counseling skills. And the Great Commission doesn't say you have to be a licensed counselor to reach others, but yet we do have a responsibility to continue learning. But I definitely agree that our focus needs to be that love and that comfort for those people. Thank you so much, Ashley. This was so fun and interesting.
Well, thank you for engaging with me. So my challenge to all of us as we leave is, when you hear of things like the body keeps the score, and you know that somebody like Bessel van der Kolk is coming from an atheistic, Darwinistic perspective, and he is very clearly not a believer, and even if you listen to much of what he says, he's very political. But don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, but be willing to basically run it through that grid of, Lord, is there truth in this that we can apply to our counseling practice? And then how can we do so in a way that glorifies God and also honors the scientific community, and holding those things hand in hand, knowing that this is God's truth and that God has given us the responsibility to care well for others and to love them well. So that's my challenge to us in whatever counseling system we're drawing from. Thanks, Meg.
Thanks, Ash.